Today is my honor to present to you this year's lucky bird, corn, and just in case we needed him, cob. Corn and cob. That's not too hard to remember, is it?
Касается преследования Трампа, но это, конечно, для нас то, что происходит в сегодняшних условиях, на мой взгляд, это хорошо, потому что это показывает всю гнилость американской политической системы, которая не может претендовать на то, чтобы учить других демократии. Все, что происходит с Трампом, это преследование по политическим мотивам своего политического конкурента. Что касается частного бизнеса Илона Маска, он, безусловно, выдающийся человек. Это надо признать. Но я думаю, что это и признают во всем мире. Он, активный, талантливый бизнесмен.
We need to make just a very giant amount of anode, cathode, lithium hydroxide, lithium carbonate. It's really the refining capacity that is the biggest choke point. So that's why we're building a lithium refinery in Corpus Christi.
Musk looking to dip his toes in yet another business, suggesting on Twitter that Tesla could take lithium mining into its own hands, Musk citing the slow pace of mining as a reason for sky-high prices. Take a look at the move in Lithium Americas. Getting a pop just as the tweet hit, but finishing the day down more than 7%. It's been a tough week for Lithium Americas, by the way. Jeff Mills, it seems crazy at first, but then you think, you know what, he's just solidifying all his supplies. I mean, if you're going to make chips and you're going to program cars, why not have the raw materials in lithium?
Russia, China, and Bolivia signed a bilateral cooperation agreement for the extraction of lithium. The Iranian One Group company, which belongs to the State Atomic Energy Corporation Rosatom, and China's CITIC One Group signed an agreement to build an industrial complex for the extraction and production of lithium carbonate at the Department of Potasi's hydromineral spring. The company's authorities assured that the agreement creates new prospects for long-term cooperation between the two countries.
Nikita Khrushchev's American tour swings into the world's best corn country. On the Coon Rapids, Iowa farm of Roswell Garst, Mr. K has one of the most jovial and folksy days of his visit. At one of the world's most modern, efficient, and profitable farming operations, Khrushchev shows an enthusiasm springing from his Ukrainian peasant background and the interest of a leader whose nation has long known major food production problems. The horde of newsmen and photographers pressing in provided a raucous sideshow to the main event. Farmer Garst and his staff angrily tried to repel the press, Garst actually hurling silage at a group of reporters as Khrushchev looks on. At another point, a tractor bore down on Khrushchev and Garst, who hastily moved aside from too close a look at its corn-chopping attachment.
First, the Holodomor, as it is known in Ukrainian. In 1932 and 1933, millions of Ukrainians starved to death because of Stalin's agricultural policies, wherein food was taken from Ukrainian homes and Ukrainian fields and sent elsewhere in the Soviet Union, especially to industrial centers. This period is sometimes known in English as the Terror Famine, to emphasize that it was not the result of blight or weather, but of human choice. So to be clear, the Stalin regime knew what it was doing. These policies were designed to punish Ukrainian peasant farmers who were seen to be resistant to Stalin's ideal of the Soviet Union.
China imported over $5 billion of U.S. corn last year, even though it's the world's second largest producer of the crop. The world's top producer is the U.S., and most of the corn these countries are producing isn't even eaten by people. About 75% of China's corn and 40% of the U.S.'s is used for animal feed. Livestock get fatter when they're fed corn, and China's growing middle class is eating more and more meat. China now needs about 250 million metric tons of corn per year. So much corn that it has to import millions of tons from other countries. And now, China has begun working to cut its reliance on foreign corn, particularly from the U.S.
The price of corn at twice the level as to where they were before the pandemic. Also, soybeans twice as expensive. Keep in mind that soybeans are fed to livestock.
Right at midnight, President Trump imposed new tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese imports to the U.S. This dramatic escalation in the trade war comes just ahead of last-ditch talks today, with China promising to retaliate, American consumers caught in the middle.
Russia, China's northern neighbor, is jumping into China's agriculture market. Chief among them, soybeans are appearing on the list of products ready to be sold to China in bulk. This comes amidst the prolonged China-US trade war in which tit-for-tat tariffs have been imposed on the US soybean exports. This strongly frustrates the US soybean trade with China, and Russia is trying to pry into China's soybean market.
In southern Turkey, buildings crumble like sand.
It was weeks in the making, but even though Turkey's president made the trip to Sochi, it wasn't enough to revive the grain deal. So Turkey is now appealing for compromise. Ukraine needs to soften its approach, said Recep Tayyip Erdogan, referring to the UN-backed deal which broke down this summer when Russia pulled out. Vladimir Putin accuses Western countries of blocking Russian food and fertilizer from world markets, and he says he would agree to the grain deal if some of the restrictions around international banking and insurance were lifted. Under the deal last year, more than 30 million tons of grain, corn, and sunflower products were shipped out of Ukraine.
We don't even need to know when the world will run out of phosphate because we are already seeing shortages. And also, we are seeing countries take drastic economic policies to protect their own phosphate. For example, phosphate prices have increased by roughly 80% since early 2020. In September of 2021, China banned exporting of any of its own phosphate in hopes of assuring that it had enough phosphate to produce enough fertilizer to grow its own food for the foreseeable future. But there is one key aspect that I have left out until this point, and that is this. You see, China has the second largest phosphate reserves in the world, as it owns roughly 5% of the world's phosphate. And keep in mind that is second on this list, and it is already concerned about its phosphate supply. Syria has the third largest amount of phosphate at 3%, Algeria is next at just under 3%, and the rest of the world has only 2% or less each per country in terms of the world's phosphate reserves. But then at number 1, there is the country of Morocco. You see, Morocco owns a whopping 70% of the world's phosphate. And let's think about that for a second. One nation owns 70% of a resource that can dictate which other nations will be able to feed their population.
So if you look at these two photos side by side, this is from an earthquake in Turkey earlier this year. This is from the earthquake in Morocco over the weekend. Now it all just looks like rubble, right? But one collapse is much more survivable than the other.
Well, rescue teams in Morocco are battling to reach people still trapped in the rubble following Friday's earthquake. Nearly 2,500 people are known to have died.
The Suez Canal is one of the world's busiest maritime channels. It links the North Atlantic to Asia via the Mediterranean Sea, to the Red Sea, and then to the Indian Ocean. The Suez Canal plays a crucial role in the international oil trade, with tankers going to and from the Middle East to Asia, Europe, and North America. The canal runs about 190 kilometers through Egypt, starting in the north from the Mediterranean at Port Said and running down to the Gulf of Suez in the Red Sea. These days, the Suez Canal is managed and operated by the Egyptian government through the Suez Canal Authority.
This is not the view you want when navigating the Suez Canal. A giant container ship wedged from bank to bank, blocking one of the world's most important shipping lanes. The 400-metre-long Ever Given got stuck on Tuesday morning, running aground in high winds, reportedly after a power failure on board. A fleet of tugboats has been trying to refloat the megaship ever since, while a digger, tiny by comparison, tries to extricate her bow from the eastern bank. The Ever Given's mishap temporarily closed a route that's used by 50 large ships every day. With the canal blocked, scores of vessels were left waiting in maritime traffic jams at either end. This was the picture at 1600 hours GMT on Wednesday. As tankers queued, oil prices rose. The blockage another blow to global trade, disrupted by COVID. The canal was twice closed by war in the 20th century. The Suez Crisis in 1956 and the 1967 Arab-Israeli war blockades hastened the development of ever larger ships.
The Pentagon is reportedly trying to narrow down the number of people who may have had security clearance to the trove of classified documents first leaked on social media back in early March. As the search for the source of the leak continues, Washington is busy doing damage control. The revelation suggests the U.S. has spied on key allies, including Israel and South Korea. On Tuesday, Seoul dismissed a significant number of the files, calling them fake. The Pentagon says it's ordered an internal review describing the leak as a very serious national security risk. But the Washington Post is reporting that the leaked information could implicate a U.S. ally, Egypt, in the sales of weapons to Russia. The documents reportedly reveal Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi ordering the production of 40,000 rockets for Moscow, and that he told officials to keep it secret to avoid problems with the West.
Well, we have confirmed that Israel was the source for at least some of this information. This was our intelligence partner, and at least some of the information that President Trump shared with Russian officials. Now, the White House is not officially commenting on this. We just had a briefing with Sean Spicer in which he refused to comment on where this intelligence came from. And it's worth noting earlier today, H.R. McMaster, who's the president's national security advisor, said when the president was sharing information with the Russians, he also did not know where the source of this information, where the information was coming from. This, of course, Brooke, comes against the backdrop of what is going to be a very ambitious foreign trip that the president will soon be embarking on, and one of those stops includes Israel.
So somewhere around along 2022, Israeli intelligence was able to get the plan for the Hamas attack. It was codenamed by Israeli intelligence the Wall of Jericho, the Jericho Wall. And it details in many different details how the attack is going to take place, exactly as it took place more than a year after.
We're learning more about this ransomware gang that attacked one of the biggest meat suppliers anywhere.
That's right, Shep. The group responsible for the attack is known as REvil. You'll remember them as the group that attacked a company affiliated with Apple back in April. They're a Russian-speaking gang, probably operating out of a former Soviet state. The estimates are that REvil brought in at least $100 million in ransoms in 2020, if not significantly more than that. Now, they're just one of a number of high-profile Russian-linked gangs targeting Western companies. The White House has said they don't believe Vladimir Putin himself has been directing these attacks, but he has the power to stop them, and he has not intervened.
In his first news conference since winning the White House, Donald Trump acknowledged he believes Russia hacked the Democratic National Committee's computers in a bid to influence the November 8th presidential election.
As far as hacking, I think it was Russia, but I think we also get hacked by other countries and other people.
Seemingly downplaying the incident,
As Putin's spokesman said on Thursday, Russia will consider retaliatory measures, and senior administration officials have been clear about saying that these penalties are, quote, not the sum total of everything we are doing. So is this more political theater, or as Russia's embassy in the UK tweeted, quote unquote, Cold War deja vu?
Well, listen, based on what U.S. officials are saying, there is more to come, and we suspect that that could mean some sort of cyber action, but we don't know, and U.S. officials aren't talking about that. That is classified, and you have U.S. officials and intelligence agencies going public with some of their analysis. You just don't see that every day, where they talk about some of the tools that they see.
The indictment charges 12 Russian military officers by name for conspiring to interfere with the 2016 presidential election. 11 of the defendants are charged with conspiring to hack into computers, steal documents, and release those documents with the intent to interfere in the election.
The indictment outlines a sweeping effort by Russian intelligence to hack into Democratic Party email accounts and computers, including the Hillary Clinton presidential campaign. Rosenstein said no Americans were involved in the hacking effort.
With every major U.S. intelligence agency concluding that Russia did, in fact, interfere with the election.
I think it's ridiculous. I think it's just another excuse. I don't believe it.
In his first news conference since winning the White House, Donald Trump acknowledged he believes Russia hacked the Democratic National Committee's computers in a bid to influence the November 8th presidential election.
As far as hacking, I think it was Russia, but I think we also get hacked by other countries, and I think it's ridiculous. I think it's just another excuse. I don't believe it.
President Trump's proposed budget plan could threaten America's ability to fight health threats. Former CDC Director Tom Frieden outlines his concerns in a new op-ed for Time magazine. He says the agency he led for 8 years now faces unprecedented and potentially catastrophic cuts.
Dr. Tom Frieden is with us now from Washington. Doctor, the Trump budget proposal calls for reforms to the CDC through a new $500 million block grant awarded to the states. Now, in your piece for Time, you say that these block grants are just bad government. Can you explain why you feel this way?
Well, first off, the question is how many resources do we devote to protecting Americans? The CDC protects Americans. It works 24/7 to do that, and it can only do that if it gets the resources from Congress. But in addition to the amount of money provided for protection, there's also how it's provided. Block grants basically send a blank check to the states and say, use it how you see fit. That may be good policy for some parts of government. For public health, it's really bad government.
Unlike many laboratories, at Virginia's state laboratory, the hope is that nothing novel is discovered. For example, in its collection of frozen samples of mosquitoes, or its countless test tubes of potential flu virus.
Is this the one that actually is currently sweeping the nation? Or?
Correct.
The analysis conducted here and in state labs around the U.S. is submitted to the National Centers for Disease Control, or CDC, where deliberations can be made about the health of the nation and disease prevention.
The laboratory performs laboratory testing to support the identification of infectious diseases that are of public health significance, but we also can identify chemicals and other toxins that could potentially cause harm in the environment, to our food supply, and to the animal communities.
But this lab is already cutting back its testing and hiring due to a proposed 12% funding cut for the CDC, and that means reduced surveillance and reduced reaction times to an outbreak.
If you cut the funding for those people who are doing this work, it won't get done. If we have more than one outbreak at a time, if we had a foodborne disease outbreak at the same time we were trying to manage the Zika response, we would have been in big trouble. Because what you find is that the people who would respond to Zika are the same people who would be called upon to respond to a foodborne disease.
This is the lab where they test for Ebola. But following West Africa's Ebola outbreak, Congress awarded $600 million to the CDC to ensure such infectious diseases were kept out of the U.S. Labs in Africa, Asia, and Latin America were upgraded. 1,400 epidemiologists were trained. Outbreak response times have been reduced from weeks to hours. But due to budget fears, the CDC says it's already planning to scrap its operation in 39 countries, leaving just 10. The fear of an international pandemic may yet make Congress renew global funding when the money runs out.
I'm declaring a public health emergency of international concern over the global outbreak of novel coronavirus. The main reason for this declaration is not because of what is happening in China, but because of what is happening in other countries. Our greatest concern is the potential for the virus to spread to countries with weaker health systems and which are ill prepared to deal with it. Let me be clear. This declaration is not a vote of no confidence in China.